My new walking boots are properly broken in now. They're so comfy. I love them.
Oh, I've heard about your bike, but I didn't know about the boots.
Oh, I'm like 90% outdoors now.
Oh, right.
And after going to Cornwall, I mean, I even like beaches now. I never liked them before.
How did you work wearing the boots?
So I went for a big long hike with some friends outside Chichester in the beautiful countryside. And I happened to come across a sign for the local elections for a candidate called Jeremy Hunt.
Ah.
But it's an old man with a moustache. I was like, that's not Jeremy Hunt. So I said to the team, get me Jeremy Hunt, but lucky dip, don't tell me which one you've got. Who's booked for Newscast tonight?
Have we booked the wrong one?
Which Jeremy Hunt have we got?
Well, if I met that other Jeremy Hunt campaigning for a local council seat, do you know what I'd say to him? I'd say, you've got the wrong last name for going into politics.
Oh, it's that Jeremy Hunt we've got. Pleasure to see you, Jeremy. Have you met the other Jeremy Hunt?
Do you know, there is a Jeremy Hunt local councillor in Sussex. Were you in Sussex? Or
Yeah, I was in
Cornwall?
Sussex. Yeah, I was in Sussex.
Yeah, no, I have met him on Zoom, actually. And I think I met him in the flesh as well. So I probably had that exact conversation with him.
Well, Jeremy, you will be relieved to hear that unlike the last edition of Newscast you were on, we do not have a quiz about an obscure British foreign territory to test your knowledge as a former Foreign Secretary. We're going to be asking you about your work on the Health Select Committee and COVID on this edition of Newscast.
Newscast from the BBC.
Hello, it's Adam in the studio with...
Chris in the studio for my second week in a row. Here on my own last week when you guys were at the G7 in Cornwall. But yeah, being in here and face-to-face contact, this is just terrific.
And very out of character for me. Like, I'm tempted to sort of give you a hug, which is not my sort of thing at all. But it's so nice to...
It's great. It does make it weird, though, to imagine that back in the Brexit cast days, there was 4 of us in this studio, which just now feels very, very, well, weird in the context of the pandemic, but very kind of un-British, that we're all sort of shoulder to shoulder.
No, we'd have like a Koonsberg and an Adler in this tiny gap.
This feels close enough.
Anyway, filling the gap virtually for those two is our guest for this edition. It's Jeremy Hunt, former Health Secretary and now Chair of the Health Select Committee. Hello.
Hi, good evening.
Right, we could do a 2-hour-long episode with you because there's a lot of stuff to talk about, whether it's COVID...
7 hours.
Well, I mean, if you've got that time available...
We do 7-hour sessions.
There is a precedent.
Actually, yeah.
Yeah, there is a precedent.
Yeah, well, we'll dive into that. But actually, what was it like questioning Dominic Cummings for 7 entire hours a couple of weeks ago? I mean, there must have been a real test of your stamina as a chairman and an inquisitor.
Well, there was a little bit of, trying to manage the loo breaks and that kind of thing. But to his credit, there wasn't a single boring minute over an entire 7 hours. And he'd been going for about half an hour. And we had in our mind it would be about 3.5 hours, something like that. And I wrote a little note to Greg Clark, my co-chair, saying, I think we've just got to let this one run for as long as it takes. It is just so important what we're hearing. And it was absolutely fascinating.
Jeremy, I wonder what your reflections were on Dominic Cummings before the hearing and how they changed once the 7 hours were up.
Well, before the hearing, I had him in my mind as a sort of Svengali genius type, in the way that perhaps Steve Hilton was for David Cameron, someone who's licensed to think blue sky, think out of the box, shake things up. After the hearing, I came away actually pretty impressed with his intellect and his originality. But I also thought this is someone who is political to his fingertips. Ferocity of his attacks on some individuals, the not wanting to touch other individuals. This was someone who plans things through very carefully and really understands the politics of every situation he's in.
Well, and it then triggered a series of events, because a few weeks after that hearing, you then had Matt Hancock, the Health Secretary himself, in to defend himself against all those claims made by Dominic Cummings. And people said he was quite kind of calm and he wasn't rattled and he seemed to have kind of a good answer for everything. But then that seems to have provoked Dominic Cummings, who then this week wrote his now infamous Substack, which is the new newsletter service he's using. And there's a series of very foul-mouthed screen grabs from Boris Johnson sent to Dominic Cummings' phone that he shared on that Substack. And they're too naughty for us to read out, but there's one we can read out, which is the one about ventilators and PPE. And Boris Johnson just replies to that message from Dominic Cummings back in 2020. It's Hancock. He's been hopeless. So, Jeremy, what did you think when you read the Substack and you saw all the screen-grabbed WhatsApp messages?
I thought that in a pandemic, it's not actually that surprising that a prime minister might be doing a bit of effing and blinding about other cabinet ministers. And I could easily imagine the same kind of thing happening when David Cameron was prime minister. And indeed, when Theresa May was prime minister, but without the effing and blinding, because she would never do that. But I wasn't terribly surprised. If you think about the pressure that Number 10 was under in that period, and things were going wrong. So I didn't read too much into that. I'm sure that I've had prime ministers who said the same things about me in my 9 years in the cabinet at various moments. I think that is just part of what happens.
Jeremy, I wonder where you feel this leaves Matt Hancock personally, because if any of us put ourselves into his shoes, seeing these messages written by his current boss, for him the Prime Minister, yes, this was probably tapped out in the heat of the moment. Yes, it's WhatsApp, so it's kind of almost the equivalent of a throwaway conversation. But I just wonder where it leaves him psychologically, personally, professionally, trying to carry on in the job, go to a cabinet meeting, for instance, knowing that that's what the Prime Minister, at least in that moment, thought of him.
Well, of course, it's awkward when your boss is reported to be saying things like that. But curiously, if Boris Johnson had been planning to move Matt Hancock in a reshuffle, I think it's unlikely that he would do that anytime soon, because I don't think he'd want to be seen to be reacting to what Dominic Cummings said. So the immediate impact may be the opposite of what Mr. Cummings intended.
And it's also given us a new classic in the genre of politicians being doorstepped, which is the word we use for when we chase after them when they're leaving their house or office or getting in their car.
The particular joy of this being that he was in his car, and therefore your chances as a reporter of getting anything are pretty low because the windows are up and he zooms by, but the windows were down.
And it's also just hilarious.
Yeah.
Are you hopeless, Mr. Hancock? I don't think so.
It's one of those ones as a journalist when you do those doorsteps that all of the luck is on your side because it's a hot day and the windows were down. Most of the time the car would have just zipped straight past.
Jeremy, do you think that's a new high or a new...
relieved. I'm just relieved. I had so many embarrassing doorsteps in my time as Health Secretary and Foreign Secretary, and so many appalling gaffes, including getting the nationality of my wife wrong, that hopefully these will all be dim, distant memories because people will be thinking about Matt Hancock's one last week.
He's trumped you. Also, you're famous as a politician who jogs and has the cameras outside their house. Do you think when Dominic Cummings went out jogging outside his house in front of the cameras on Wednesday, he was actually taking the mickey out of Matt Hancock, who likes to do a bit of a jog in front of the cameras? Do you think that was Dominic Cummings is that calculating? Even his kind of photo ops is staged to embarrass people?
He's definitely that calculating. Whether that was the motive or not, I don't know. But I think every single move that he does in these situations is choreographed. He was a special advisor. He is someone was paid to think about how the media are going to react to different announcements. And I think he's very good at it.
And let's just remind ourselves of one of the things that you said to him, Dominic Cummings, in that hearing that your committee did a couple of weeks ago. Let's just remind ourselves.
The Cabinet Secretary said to the Prime Minister in almost the first meeting when he came back, "Prime Minister, the British system is not set up to deal with a Secretary of State who repeatedly lies in meetings."
Now, those are very serious allegations said under parliamentary privilege, and we've got Mr. Hancock coming here in 2 weeks' time to respond to those. But as Greg Clark said, we'd be very grateful for any evidence that you have to back up those assertions.
So that was a good few weeks ago. Have you had any more evidence to your committees from Dominic Cummings?
No, we didn't. And that's why I think Matt Hancock's session went a lot more smoothly, because he was able to say, look, the evidence that was promised did materialise. The fascinating thing about these sessions is, of course, the personal invective, the comments about this person being hopeless, this person lying, and so on. But actually behind that, Dominic Cummings said some very important things about what went wrong in our initial handling of the pandemic, and the fact that the scientific advice was wrong, the fact that it wasn't challenged, the reason that it wasn't challenged, the fact that test and trace was set up so late, why test and trace then didn't prevent future lockdowns. These are actually the substance of what he said. So I hope that doesn't get too overshadowed by some of the salacious things we've been talking about in this podcast.
Oh no, point taken, very subtly made, as our former chief diplomat, former foreign secretary, let's not forget. But that you've just given us a little insight there into what your committee might end up concluding, haven't you? That those are the areas, it seems to me, that you might be zooming in on, that you will reach a judgment on whenever you publish your report, which I don't know when that will be. Maybe you could tell us.
Well, we're hoping to publish before the summer recess. We're not having any more evidence sessions. We've got to write it and agree it between the two committees. But you're right, the purpose of our report is it's going to come out early, probably 2 years before the public inquiry report. So it'll be the first opportunity for the government to look at independent recommendations. And, we could have another pandemic in that period. We don't want to wait 2 years before we start learning lessons. So our focus will be looking forward. Although it's of great interest to you guys, which cabinet ministers are underperforming and which are overperforming, that is something that's true of any government at any time. What we want to look at is the structural things that we need to do as a country to make sure that we're safer when we get our next pandemic.
Should we take Jeremy Hunt's hint? Oh, I nearly did a Jim Naughty there.
That would have made this a much listened to podcast.
Although I got the word hunt and hint mixed up there, not the other way around. Shall we take Jeremy's hint and talk about the substance of COVID now?
Yeah. And the delay to step 4, Jeremy, in England, the right call?
I think it was the right call. But, this was a much more difficult one than I think we've had earlier in the pandemic. I mean, you are paid to look at the numbers, and I'm there in the select committee to look at the numbers. I don't think the numbers really gave a slam dunk answer as to what needs to happen, because yes, the Delta variant is exploding, but only 1% of NHS hospital beds are occupied with COVID patients. And I think basically what the government was saying is, look, for the sake of 4 weeks, we can contain this risk when we don't really know how dangerous it is. And I think most people probably agree with that cautious approach, but I think it was a genuinely difficult call.
Are you hinting that they've perhaps been more cautious than they needed to be?
I think they were erring on the side of caution, yes. I think that in earlier decisions, without preempting our inquiry, I think they erred on the side of taking risks, and those proved to have been unwise decisions. I think we have to look at this as a failure of the state, because the root cause, I think so far, and Dominic Cummings' evidence sessions made this very clear, is that the wrong scientific advice was given to ministers, but in fairness, the ministers didn't challenge that advice enough. And this well-oiled machine, the British state, which we all thought was preparing for pandemics. I was responsible for some of those preparations, and clearly they weren't good enough given what happened. That well-oiled machine failed us when we needed it to succeed. So I think it goes beyond personalities, and we have to really understand why it was that it took us so long to learn from the best in the world, the Koreas, the Taiwans, the Japans, the Singapores, the Australias, rather than being hung up on the sort of suppression, immunity, mitigation strategies that we stuck around with for too long.
Jeremy, thank you very much. And just before we let you go, give us a target date for your committee's report coming out.
Well, target dates, goodness me. I think the ambition is to do it before the House of Commons breaks for summer recess, which will be the week of the 19th of July. So it'll be Freedom Day for the country and Freedom Day for the committee when we've got this report off our chests. But it's an ambition. We can't guarantee it.
And Jeremy, at least you didn't use my pet peeve worst phrase of Westminster, which you regularly hear from people in government, in due course. in answer to any question about when something's coming out. What you said was an elaborate version of that with an aimed for deadline, but not those dreaded 3 words. I can give you some
jargon if you like, Adam. I could say a reasonable worst case scenario is that it doesn't come out until September, but we are aiming for July.
Thanks for talking to us, Jeremy.
See you again in due course.
Cheers.
Right, now we're going to talk about Northern Ireland. And Chris, did you get that press release from the Northern Ireland office in your email this morning? Very pleased that Brandon Lewis, the Northern Ireland Secretary, had stayed up very late the night before to broker a deal between the DUP and Sinn Féin to get Paul Givan in as the new First Minister of the Northern Ireland Executive and Michelle O'Neill from Sinn Féin back in as the Deputy First Minister. This is after Arlene Foster got hurt. But then it's all sort of gone a bit wrong since then, since that triumphal email.
Yeah, so said email was in my inbox. And as you say, it's that word triumphant, isn't it? Because when you look at these emails that governments or parties churn out, there's all the verbiage, but then there's the tone. And the clear tone of that was triumphant. We've done it, it might as well have said in as many words. And yet, here we are at the end of the day, and it looks a bit shaky.
Yeah. And there is a catch to this because we're recording this episode at tea time on Thursday. And by the time you're listening or watching to it, the situation may have changed. But let's find out what's going on right now in a bit of the background from our correspondent, Dan Johnson, who's actually filling in as the Northern Ireland correspondent. And this is his first week.
First week and there's political chaos crises already.
So what's going on?
Well, it's been a busy week and there hasn't been a First Minister since Monday because Arlene Foster officially stepped down and the two main parties here, Sinn Féin and the DUP, couldn't agree on who should replace her or the terms under which her replacement would take over. So Paul Givan was the preferred candidate of the DUP, but Sinn Féin refused to endorse him in the office until they got some reassurances on the Irish language here in Northern Ireland. Protection and promotion of that language was something that they've been pushing for a while, and it took the intervention of Brandon Lewis to bring about, very late last night and the early hours of this morning, a deal between the parties that will see some progress now on the Irish language, or if there isn't progress, he will intervene and put legislation through the Parliament at Westminster to make sure that promotion and protection is in place. Now that's pleased the Sinn Féin party, who were prepared to come here this morning and endorse Paul Givan in his confirmation as First Minister, but it's really upset a lot of the politicians in the Democratic Unionist Party who are now not happy with the move that their leader, Edwin Poots, has made, the deal that he struck with the UK government.
Yeah, so help us out, Dan, with the personalities here. So you've got Edwin Poots, who's the new DUP leader, but he's not the First Minister, as you say, because that's Paul Givan. And then you've got the DUP, who aren't very happy about what's worked its way through, and plenty of them are being, well, very open and public about their unhappiness.
Yes, there's been a lot of bitterness in the DUP since Arlene Foster was overthrown, really, and forced to step down. Edwin Poots, this is his 20th day in the job as leader, so he's very new in that office. He decided not to take up the job of First Minister as well as Arlene Foster had done, but he wanted Paul Givan, a protege of his, to take that role instead. And that's what he's been trying to work out for the last few days since Arlene Foster officially stepped down on Monday. As I say, it all came down to this wrangling over the status, the protection for the Irish language. Sinn Féin saw a chance to get extra reassurances on that. They got those last night from the Northern Ireland Secretary, Brandon Lewis. He put that triumphant statement out this morning, which some people were saying this morning sounded like his Mo Molan moment or something. Well, it hasn't worked out like that because the division in the DUP has only become even more apparent. There's a meeting of the party members and officials going on at the moment, potentially with a vote of no confidence in the new leader over the moves that he's made here. There were people going into that meeting saying you can't be a leader if no one's following you. So Edwin Poots looks like he's managed to get his man in office here at Stormont, but at what cost to his leadership? Does he have the confidence, the support of his own party now?
20 days. And of course, friend of the podcast, Arlene Foster, the former First Minister and former leader of the DUP, is really living her best life during all of this. She tweeted, just as this drama was reaching its crescendo, just had a lovely lunch at Dean's at Queen's, which apparently is a very nice restaurant.
I've just looked it up, actually.
With a good friend. It's great. Hospitality is open again. Hope everyone's having a great day this lovely sunny afternoon.
I've just looked up Dean's at Queen's. A Michelin bib and 2 AA rosettes. Sounds like quite a spot for a
I wonder if
bit
she
of lunch.
paid.
Yeah, or who she was with. But yes.
Yeah, she's living her best life. So, just to be clear, are the DUP
sitting back
members of
watching this after everything that's gone on? There was just a hint of smugness about that tweet, wasn't there?
So do we think the DUP members of the Assembly are serious about getting rid of Edwin Poots, or is this just a kind of show of force to remind him who's boss? I mean, what are the options? What are the potential outcomes here?
That will be the real test. Is this just to sort of put him on watch and to say that he can't just do things that they don't agree with? They did try to warn him this morning. They said, don't nominate Paul Given because we don't support the deal that you've done. Now, will they actually take this any further? Will they actually push for a vote of no confidence, which could force him out of office and mean there has to be another leadership campaign, election, to find a new leader for the DUP after only 3 weeks? That would be a traumatic thing for the party that is so divided already. And I think if they took a step back and thought about it, they'd realise that would be a very divisive, a very difficult, a very dangerous thing to do for unionism in Northern Ireland at the moment. So whether things will get that far, we'll have to see. But certainly Edwin Poots has kind of got what he wanted out of this week, but at huge cost to his own support from his own members, and unionists more widely saying that this has just not been handled very well at all, and that they're not impressed with the way things are going in the early days of this new administration.
Dan, thank you very much. And this is what you've done for your first week. Can't wait to see what you've got planned for your second as the acting Northern Ireland correspondent. Thank you very much.
Cheers, Dan.
Tough act to follow.
And of course, this matters because you've got negotiations with the EU over the Northern Ireland Protocol, which is meant to be bringing stability to Northern Ireland after Brexit, but is bringing instability. And then you've got instability within Northern Ireland anyway. So instability on top of an unstable situation equals, guess what? Even more instability.
Yeah, and an issue that matters obviously hugely for people in Northern Ireland, but as you say, then has ramifications for the rest of the UK and the EU as well.
And it's another one of those examples of deja vu from the Brexit negotiations, isn't it? That we remember so well from all the millions of episodes of podcasts we did, where there was no Northern Ireland Assembly, no Northern Ireland executive in place then. And people say, actually, one of the reasons the issue got so heated and so complicated and so difficult to solve was the lack of representation in Northern Ireland. And if we're heading for that again, because if the Assembly collapses as a result of this...
Hence the triumphalism from the Northern Ireland Secretary this morning. But then where are we now?
Yeah, so that massive few has turned into something else.
Absolutely.
So 4 years after the Manchester Arena attack, which killed 22 people, that huge, long-running inquiry has produced its first reports into the security around the event. And it's identified some quite major failings. And we can talk about them now with our correspondent, Judith Moritz. Hello, Judith.
Hi.
So just give us the summary version then of what could have been done potentially to stop Salman Abedi blowing up his rucksack and killing those people at that Ariana Grande concert.
I mean, the summary version is well put because it's a meaty document, this is the first report of 3 which the Arena inquiry is going to publish, and this just deals with that question of the security failings that led to the fact that Abedi could slip through the net. Essentially, he got past the police, he got past private security to allow that attack to happen. And so Sir John Saunders, who's been chairing the inquiry, has looked at how those failings happened. He's pointed the finger in a really critical report today at British Transport Police, at the operators of the Arena, SMG, and at the subcontracted security firm Shosec, who do security for them. They all bear some blame. Altogether, their failings, Sir John is clear. He says, with the failings which led to the security lapses, if those failings had been avoided, lives could have been saved. It's that bleak. And he points the finger corporately at those organisations, but he's also talked about the personal responsibility of some of the people who were working that night, in particular some of the stewards who were teenagers, 18, 19 years old, who were working, who failed, he says, and also some of the police officers who should have been patrolling the room where the bomb went off, and at the time of the explosion they weren't there at all. They were at the train station next door, and he says there's no justification for that. So it's a catalogue of errors and failings and mistakes. It makes miserable reading for the families who lost loved ones and those who survived the attack. And the other thing is that this report really is setting out, that the purpose of it, setting out proposals to make improvements for the future, recommendations, changes in the law to make sure that this kind of thing, if possible, never happens again, and if it was to happen again, that the impact shouldn't be so severe.
Judith, you mentioned there that the families, the relatives. Let's hear from Paul Hett, whose son Martin died in the attack, speaking after the report came out today.
Today, our heartbreak turns to anger. We entrusted the safety of our loved ones into organisations and agencies who had a duty of care to protect them. This inquiry has rightly found that we were failed on every level. This terrorist atrocity could and should have been prevented, and 22 innocent people should not have lost their lives.
Now, Judith, hearing that is very moving, because it seems that for that particular family, this isn't bringing closure at all. It's actually making them more upset.
Yeah, it's really interesting hearing Paul Hett say that heartbreak turns to anger. That is a sentiment that I heard from lots of the families here. It's also given them purpose. I mean, they've been coming to court, many of them, day after day to listen to the evidence, which is really difficult to take in. Some of the granular detail of what went wrong. If you've lost somebody directly in this, it is so painful. But they still come to court, they're still listening to the evidence, and they're saying to me, look, it's because we are invested in this inquiry process. We don't want other families in future to have to go through what we're going through.
Judith, you mentioned that this was the first of 3 reports. Tell us a bit about the other 2 and when we're going to see them.
Yeah, the inquiry chairman had originally planned, I think, to hear all of the evidence and then produce one huge report at the end. And it became apparent fairly early on that the scope is so huge and the hearings are taking so long, partly, I think, as well because of the pandemic. They've carried on going here, but they've also been having remote hearings, that it wasn't practical to leave everything to the end. And also mindful of the fact that Martin's Law is something that's being considered by government. The chairman said, I'll do this on a rolling basis, so I'll produce 3 reports instead of 1. The second report will deal with a huge amount of material. Now, that includes the way the emergency services responded to the attack, and we already know that there were multiple failings by all of the services. It'll look at that. It will also look at what happened to each one of the 22 victims and whether any of them could have been saved. There are questions particularly about 2 of them, about John Atkinson and about the youngest victim, Safi Roussos, who was just 8 years old, and whether they might have been saved with better first aid treatment. So it will look at all of that. The third report is going to look at what was known by the security services about the bomber, about his family, about their radicalisation, and about whether the attack could have been foreseen and prevented by those services. Some of the hearings relating to that section of evidence will be held in private. The families won't be given access because of national security. So this has got a long and complicated distance to go, I would say, certainly to the end of this year, into next year potentially. And I'm expecting 2 more very seriously critical reports to follow.
And Chris, I mean, for journalists sitting through these inquiries and hearing quite harrowing evidence, it's sometimes quite difficult as well. We should remember that, and so we should say thank you to you for doing that for us, Judith. Thank you.
Good to talk to you. Thanks.
And that's all for this edition of Newscast. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Thanks to everyone who's been on it, and thanks to you, Chris, for being here in the studio physically with me, but still 2 meters apart.
It was a joy. Thank you for having me.
Bye.
Bye.
Newscast from the BBC.